Afternoon. It's exciting to be with you at yet another national finals competition. I want to congratulate you on overcoming adverse circumstances. You should enjoy this high achievement to be a participant in We the People, the National Finals Challenge. I'm Dave Adler. I'm president of the Alturas Institute and a member of the law faculty at University of Idaho. I look forward to our conversation today. My colleagues will introduce themselves.
I'm Donald Rogers. I'm instructor of history at Central Connecticut State University and a veteran of many years judging We the People. I know how competitive it is, and so I know it's a real achievement to see you here competing at the national level, and I congratulate you for that. And especially, as Professor Adler said, given the challenges that we face, but I can see that the challenges are not a challenge to you. You'll do really well anyway. So I look forward to your comments.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado. And I've worked with students and judging the We the People program for a long time. And I too congratulate you on getting to participate in the National We the People's Challenge today. And we look forward very much to your presentation.
Will you please introduce yourselves and your teacher, and then tell us one thing that you were doing before the coronavirus struck?
Good afternoon. We are Foothill High School's Unit 4, representing the state of California. My name is Karina Stacy. One thing that I was doing before coronavirus struck is I was meeting up with my unit like every single day to practice for states.
My name is Audrey Im. One thing that I was doing a lot before coronavirus was, yes, meeting up with my unit, and also just like, going to school, I guess, which sounds but yes, I do miss doing that. So.
My name is Kira Thordson, and one thing that I was doing was getting excited to go tour my colleges to decide where I'll be attending in the fall. Unfortunately, I was not able to do that, but I was excited to have this opportunity to keep practicing with my unit and retain some normalcy through this trying time.
My name is Vaishya Koda, and one thing that I was doing before quarantine was playing volleyball. We were having our best season yet, the senior year. We would like to thank the judges, the audience, and the timekeeper for being here today, as well as introduce our coaches, Mr. Dettermore and Mr. McBride.
Good. Well, thank you very much. We look forward to our exchange this afternoon. Let me read the question, which comes from Unit 4, and it's number 3, and it reads as follows. Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution provides that state legislatures can determine the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives. It gives Congress the power to make or alter such regulations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a uniform election process? And then, what responsibility do state legislatures, state election officials, and citizens have in maintaining free and fair elections? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of the trustee and delegate theories of representation as they apply to congressional districts? Please proceed.
Our election process should prioritize giving a voice to all citizens and their opinions. While enacting certain uniform election policies would increase civic participation and representation, too much uniformity would erase the important checks and balances between our state and federal governments.
Uniformity can be advantageous if the election policies implemented attempt to represent our diverse demographic. Automatic and same-day voter registration are two important reforms we believe should be implemented nationwide, as these have proven to increase voter turnout. According to a 2016 study by the United States Election Project, Minnesota's voter turnout has consistently been between 66 to 80% since implementing same-day registration in 1974.
We also believe that voter ID laws should be abandoned nationwide, as they have mainly disenfranchised minority groups. For instance, the ACLU's Voting Rights Project in 2017 reported that North Carolina previously prohibited the usage of public assistance and state employee IDs to vote, which are predominantly held by African Americans.
However, a disadvantage to uniformity in all election processes is that it would detract from states' power in our system of federalism. Article 1, Section 4 emphasizes that states hold authority over elections. With a uniform system, they would not be able to experiment with different methods, such as ranked choice voting in Maine.
In our current election system, our state legislatures, election officials, and citizens play important roles in maintaining free and fair elections. State legislatures pass bills and election-related amendments to their state constitutions that interpret federal election laws and fit their local needs. For example, this year, California passed Senate Bill 207 to allow for same-day voter registration in the March primary.
State election officials have more direct responsibilities in the election process. Under the National Voting Registration Act of 1993, states must designate a chief state election official to coordinate state responsibilities such as voter registration and funding for elections.
Citizens interact in elections by suggesting and voting on new election laws. For example, in 2018, 64% of Florida voters approved Amendment 4, which restored the right to vote for approximately 1.4 million ex-felons.
Citizens can also interact directly with elections by working the polls on election day. Those affiliated with local party organizations push participation through voter registration drives and get out the vote efforts, educating others who may not be as civically engaged.
After election, representatives must determine the best way to fairly represent their people. There are two main theories of representation, the delegate theory and the trustee theory.
An advantage of the delegate theory is that representatives are more likely to listen and respond to their constituents' needs through legislation. However, barriers such as gerrymandering incentivize representatives to align with the predominant ideology in their district in order to get reelected, rather than working to be fully representative of their constituents.
Conversely, an advantage of the trustee theory is that representatives are making decisions for the common good and attempts to better serve our government. This theory stems from 18th century philosopher Edmund Burke, who stated that elected representatives are a member of their institution over their district.
This is demonstrated in Nevada's 4th Congressional District, in which no elected representative has won by more than 15,000 votes in the last 10 years. This tight margin has led congressmen to support policies that they believe would be best for both parties in their district.
However, a disadvantage is that a trustee representative will never have enough information to truly know if their decisions are best for their district. In application, no representative relies solely on one theory of representation, instead using a combination of both the trustee and delegate theories to govern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your well-organized presentation. We'll now have some questions for you. As you think about the impact on voters of state regulations that could lead to voter discrimination, can you identify some groups in our society which still are disenfranchised or might be disenfranchised by other circumstances, including COVID-19?
I think one of the biggest groups that may be inherently disenfranchised by COVID-19 would be Native Americans. A lot of these individuals live on reservations and they're unable to come to the polls due to the COVID-19 outbreak, and they don't have access to post offices, so they're also unable to mail in their ballots effectively.
I think another group we can look to for inherent disenfranchisement is felons. And I think that while not exclusive to the COVID-19 crisis, they are an important group to look to when looking to further enfranchisement for the American people, as once they have done their time, I believe that they should retain the right to vote. So I believe in looking to more legislation, they should be included.
And one more example I think we could look to, while not necessarily discriminated against in the same, or not discriminated against, but not necessarily disenfranchised in the same way that felons we've seen a history of discriminatory voter ID laws that in turn has led to disenfranchisement of certain groups. For example, African Americans in North Carolina have historically been discriminated against with certain voter ID laws, and there have been many North Carolina Supreme Court cases that have ruled in the same way. And so through this, I think we can see that discrimination happens on all levels, regardless of, the circumstance.
Thank you.
So how broad is the authority for Congress to intervene in the state election process under Article 1, Section 4? And in what ways has Congress acted on that authority?
Well, I believe that our federal government, that Congress should be enacting legislation that would help our states to incentivize voters to go out and vote by passing legislation that, for example, the Voting Rights Act, Advancement Act of 2019, which was introduced in Congress, would reestablish the idea of pre-clearance that would get rid of sort of discriminatory acts that have been implemented ever since the ruling in Shelby County v. Holder in 2013. So I think in this way we can see Congress can help reestablish less discrimination in our states.
And going back to the beginning part of your question, when writing Article 1, Section 4, the founders intended Congress to intervene when the states implemented unfair voting practices. And that's when the founders intended for Congress to step in and have a policy that superseded any of the state's policies. And so I think that goes to what Audrey was saying with the act that's going on in 2019 and 2020 regarding Shelby County.
You've mentioned different statutes like the National Voter Registration Act and the Voting Rights Act, but can you tell us how those statutes fit together with constitutional amendments dealing with voting that have been ratified and in effect for some for a very long time?
Yes.
Yeah. Wait, yeah, go ahead.
I think we can see with the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote and allowing actually everyone to vote. I think that this in turn has tied in with all these later acts, because although we have achieved enfranchisement for a lot of groups, they're still inherently restricted by voter ID laws. So not directly taking away their fundamental right to vote, but rather taking away the substantive part of it.
Yeah. And with the idea of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 specifically, it doesn't allow for discriminatory practices or practices that allow for discriminatory intent. And I think this helps to back up our 15th Amendment, which gives the right to vote regardless of race. And it sort of tries to decrease the amount of racial disparities and tensions that we have that still exist in our communities today.
And I think this demonstrates a lot of the government's power in elections, and it goes to show that since we've achieved a certain level through the federal government, through their legislation and Supreme Court cases, we've achieved a certain level of enfranchisement. As Vaishak mentioned, the federal government is attempting to further progress towards total enfranchisement by changing the way that people register to vote and people access the polls rather than changing who is allowed to vote.
Do you see the congressional power to alter regulations as being a power that could be exercised to enforce the franchise if Congress turned, for example, to ballot by mail?
Yes, I do see that Congress should use that power as established in Article 1, Section 4, especially during this time of crisis in which vote by mail would be the safest way for individuals to vote instead of going out to the polls and possibly getting COVID-19.
And building on this, in a survey done in 2020 by Duke University, in March of this past year, it found that 72% of Americans supported the idea of the 2020 presidential election being primarily vote by mail. So I think that if we did see Congress push for a nationwide system of vote by mail, sorry, may I please finish my thought?
Please finish.
Okay, we would see that the majority of the American public would in turn support this movement as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So we'll have some comments for you and maybe some suggestions. I enjoyed your presentation very much. I thought that as a team, you were very responsive to our questions. I thought, moreover, that you all participated very effectively. I was very impressed with your ability to speak in depth about the problem of disenfranchisement. And two questions bore on that, and it gave you a lot of running room. But I appreciated your citation, for example, to the disenfranchisement of Native Americans, and you cited the particular problems involved in traveling and also access to mail. You cited felons, and to support that, you went into the experience in Florida and the vote there to restore citizen voting rights. I appreciated also the fact that you were able to argue effectively about the remedies that could be provided by resorting to vote by mail, albeit the fact that it remains imperfect. But beyond all of that, I was impressed with your references to several studies, including Duke, the fact that you had a number of important statistics at your fingertips, and that you're able to rapidly address our questions in a well-balanced way. So let me just sum up by saying I thought you did a very nice job, and good luck to you the rest of the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I also thought that you had a very nice presentation. You were very systematic in hitting each part of the question, and you backed it up with good examples, mentioned important pieces of legislation like the national law of 1993, the Motor Voter Act. I too like the references to the studies, the Minnesota study, the Duke study, that sort of backs up what's the voter process look like on the ground. You gave us some pretty direct information there. On my question about what's the scope of the Congress's authority and what are examples of how Congress has used it, you gave some good examples. The Voting Rights Act is a good one, but you could have been more specific in terms of what exactly does, place, time, and especially manner. What exactly does manner cover? Might cover, a registration, might cover other things. So I would like to hear a little bit more there, but you did have some good answers to that question. So overall, I thought it was informed and carefully measured presentation and carefully measured responses to our questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree that your presentation was very good. Sometimes we hear presentations and we think that we wish we had a lot more time to hear from the students. And I think this is one of them, because I got the impression that you know a lot more than you had a chance to share with us. But even in the limited time we have, as my colleagues have noted, you mentioned various studies, which shows in-depth research that you've done. When you're talking about the need for state experimentation on voting laws, I appreciate your reference to Maine's law involving ranked choice voting. That's the first time we've heard anybody mention that in the competition. I think that was a good example. When you were answering my question about the constitutional amendments dealing with voting, you mentioned the 19th and the 15th amendments. You might have mentioned a couple of other amendments, like the 26th Amendment that allows 18-year-olds to vote, and the 24th Amendment regarding our outlawing poll taxes. But I think that's relatively minor. I like your example, your response also to saying that Congress could enact law regarding mail-in voting. You might have mentioned that some states already have passed laws that allow mail-in voting, and from the way you're shaking your heads, it looks like you already know that information and could have shared that with us. So overall, I think you did a very nice job, and you should be congratulated, or I congratulate you for your presentation this afternoon.
Thank
I
you.
want to say again how much we enjoyed it. I want to offer you good luck going forward. You're a very well-trained, well-coached team. That's a credit to your teachers. Let's give the teachers and the students and others who helped this team along the way throughout the competition a nice round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.